Hanna Murray on TRE in the afternoon.
Joining us on the line now is Michael Menard, whose journey from trauma survivor to the man who exposed the US's leading cause of death marks one of the most significant discoveries in modern public health. He's the founder of United Against Childhood Trauma. His book is Greater Than Gravity: How Childhood Trauma is Pulling Down Humanity. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you with us. And I've been looking on your website earlier, and the statistics that you have on there that shows the enormity of childhood trauma and the amount of people who experience some kind of trauma when they're younger is absolutely shocking.
Yes, it's awful. And it stopped me in my tracks when I connected these dots and listed it. It's taking America by surprise as well. I don't have data for the rest of the world, but I have it on the U.S. And I don't think it's much different elsewhere in the world. I think it's pretty much the same.
Yeah. And did statistics show that it's happening more frequently than it used to, or less, would you say?
It is. You know, the prevalence of childhood trauma was first established in 1998 in a study that showed 63% of Americans had experienced childhood trauma. My research shows now that it's at 70%. And I just read a report from one of my colleagues that said it's at 74% of all high school seniors have experienced at least one episode of childhood trauma. So it is getting worse. And that's why the title of the book is Greater Than Gravity: How Childhood Trauma is Pulling Down Humanity. And it really is. I mean, it's the number one cause of addiction, number one cause of death, number one cause of suicide and incarceration in the United States.
Gosh.
It's just shocking.
It really is. And can you just clarify, because it sounds like it could be quite a big umbrella term, what consists as childhood trauma?
It's a great question. So childhood trauma can be described as anything that leaves a mark, a psychological mark, a physical mark. There's 10 types that are identified. There are actually more than 10, but the classics are neglect. So emotional neglect, physical neglect, abuse, physical, mental, and sexual abuse. That's 5 of them. And then the other 5 are types of parental dysfunction: a parent with mental illness, a parent with an addiction, a separation, an ugly separation between parents, someone who's been in jail. Those are all things that leave marks on children that do require remedy, require some type of intervention for that person to be whole and thriving.
Yeah. One of the statistics on your site was that 95% of people who have been incarcerated, this is in the States, have experienced some form of childhood trauma.
Yeah, I think it's actually every person. The experts told me that other 5%, they're just not telling the truth out of shame. So it's everyone. And if you've ended up in prison, most likely you've experienced childhood trauma. And it's, there was a couple of studies that healed inmates before they were paroled, and their return to prison rate cut down to 20% as opposed to 60% of the national average. So healing is possible. Healing does stop the crime. And we in America, we've really created a freight train to prison. We have foster children. Where does a foster child come from? Well, it comes from parents that didn't do their job, right? Who probably suffered in their own right. So those children, 40% of them will be in prison before age 25. Think of it. Mm-hmm. They'll be homeless. They'll be addicts. They'll be prostitutes. And it appears we turn a blind eye. And so I've decided to spend the rest of my life raising awareness to this and creating solutions.
Yeah. And you tying childhood trauma to the leading cause of death in the States or everywhere, I think, is
yes.
to do with the fact that on people's death certificates, it explains what people die from. So whether it's heart disease or heart attacks, overdose, cancer, all that kind of thing. But they don't obviously look at what people have, the reasons why people have died. Just explain that connection you made.
Yeah, they record the ending event. They don't record the cause. So I lost two brothers to heroin, and I know it was from their childhood. I experienced that same childhood. I survived. They did not. On their death certificate, it says substance abuse, but it was really childhood trauma. I have a brother-in-law of 50 years, great guy. I knew him as a teenager. He had a horrible childhood. He was a good father, a good husband, but 3 years ago, he took his life by suicide. And when they did an autopsy, they said his brain was the size and the color of a 120-year-old man. Because when you experience childhood trauma, the thermostat that controls cortisol, which is the response hormone to fight or flight, it gets stuck on and it floods the brain, destroys mitochondria in the brain, creates mental illness, creates metabolic disease, and it is by far the number one cause. And I use the same epidemiology science or methodology that we used in the 60s to determine tobacco use causes cancer. Before, it would say lung cancer. Now, it says tobacco use. Well, it should be the same thing with childhood trauma. If we don't start naming it for what it is, there's in America, 1,401 people die every day directly from childhood trauma. 511,000 people, more than any other disease in our country. And and I'm not a medical guy. I'm not a mental health guy. I'm an engineer who connected some dots because of the pain of my own childhood and trying to figure out why did I survive and others didn't. And I found the answer. It's because of childhood trauma. Yeah,
it is shocking and surprising how so many people don't join the dots with regards to, that a lot of people think that all medical issues a lot of the time are either bad luck, it's just happened to you for no reason. There's no rhyme or reason. Or it's because of some harm that you yourself have done to your body, whether it's drinking too much alcohol or smoking or drugs or things like that. So it's your fault, for want of a better word. But people don't sort of understand, or a lot of people don't understand, the connection between childhood trauma and illnesses. And I know through a member of my family who it happened to, and for them trying to explain to the doctor, oh no, the reason why I've got this is because of childhood trauma. The doctors were just going, no, it's not. It's because of this. They looked at her like she was stupid, and it was just such an odd thing to say.
It's ignorance. They're not taught this in school.
No.
That it's blaming the person is what we've done, and it's what's kept us from a solution. Because if we think it's moral failing, we're going to blame the person who's making those choices. But my brothers were good men; they were born good children. We spoil that in us, and we do things. Children are not meant to experience kind of things that we're experiencing in our society now. And we go into the survival mode and we get stuck there. So we're not built, we can't continue with love and growth and peace. We grow up with fear and anxiety and depression. 44% of all depression in the United States comes from childhood trauma. Just think of that. And what we've done, we haven't made any progress in improving it. We've medicated these people.
Yeah.
We've numbed them. We've made it worse.
And addiction's an interesting one as well, because, you know, addiction, it is well documented now that it is an illness. It's not necessarily a conscious choice that people are making on a regular basis. It's people often feel out of control once the addiction, you know, takes hold, and they don't have a choice as to what they keep going back to. But it's interesting making that connection as to how and why people become addicts in the first place.
It's pretty simple now that I've got all the facts, is that we are built to desire peace and joy. That's how we're built. That's how we are as humans. We evolve. Our societies prior to modern times cultivated that togetherness, that community, that satisfaction. When you destroy it, when you destroy the pleasure center in the brain, you start desiring things that make you feel better. That's how we're built. So we turn to, at our earliest age, we'll turn to things like food. But there's so many addictions. You know, there's sex addictions, substance, alcohol, gambling, stealing, lying, all things to give us temporary relief, but it makes everything worse, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And then we begin the downward spiral.
Absolutely. Are you happy to tell us a bit about your experiences of childhood trauma?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm one of 14 children, and we lived below the poverty level with an amazing mother, but a father who was shaped by his own trauma. And so he had a raging alcoholic father who was violent, and he carried that. It's generational trauma. That's how it works. And he brought that into the house. You know, there's no blame. There's no blame. He was a product of his own childhood. But what we experienced was violence in the home. We experienced neglect, because they're just, you know, many times my greatest trauma was going hungry. And when you don't know where your next meal is coming from, you develop an insecurity. It's called food insecurity, which translates into adulthood into obesity. I also, you know, my father taught us to be warriors and to fight for him, for his good, and taught us all the wrong things, how to steal, how to hurt people. And we did it because we wanted our father's attention. And he was much more brutal on the weak, supposedly those that were perceived as being weaker, because they weren't born with the resilience that I was, as an example. I was just tougher, and we're all different. But about half of my siblings suffer from some disorder that came from their childhood. And now they're seeking therapy because of this research, and we're still very, very close. And it's amazing. There's the promise of healing, even at this age, even at a late age. If you have the right interventions, you can put all of that in the part of the brain where it belongs, as opposed to bouncing around unresolved in your mind and your body. So, yeah, that was, you know, my neglect my trauma was neglect and the violence that I experienced in the home.
Yeah. And 13 siblings. I mean, my goodness, that's got to be crazy. Tough for everyone involved. That's a lot.
It was, yeah. What started me on this journey is that I decided to tell our story, and I wrote a memoir a couple of years ago called The Kite That Couldn't Fly. And I told 25 stories of my childhood, and they're wild. They're just, you can't make stuff up like this good. And it was a mix of joy, happiness, sadness, and tragedy that the world started to relate with. And so I thought, well, why are so many people interested? I thought it was just me. And then I dug into the research and found how prevalent it was. So I decided to write this book that's been needed for forever. And it's Greater Than Gravity. And it's all about childhood trauma, what causes it, how it's destroying our society, and more importantly, the promise of healing. So it calls for a revolution, for us to all stand up, and you're part of it right now, sharing this message. is to say, if something's not right with you, you owe it to yourself to find out, could it have been childhood trauma? And it's not about digging up bones and blaming parents. That's not the game here. It's about understanding and then finding the way to forgive and then move on to healing so that you can thrive in life.
Is forgiveness important, do you think?
Oh my, it's everything. If you don't achieve that, well, I'm a Christian. You can go back to the Bible. It's everything. And that if you do not, you're hurting only yourself if you cannot forgive. Because if you don't forgive, then you blame and then you become a victim. And if you see yourself as a victim, you're not going to go for the healing. You're going to say, well, somebody did this to me, so it's not my fault. Well, it is your fault if you choose not to heal. And so that's why forgiveness is so healthy and so needed. So that's the first thing you need to do. And I know it doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean it was right. It just means you're letting it go and you're absolving that person of the anger and negativity that you carried about that person.
Very powerful.
Yeah.
And other than forgiveness, have you got any other tips for people listening who have suffered and how to get through it?
I certainly do. What can you do to help yourself? Understand, first of all, that you're not alone. Second of all, take care of yourself. There's things like getting enough sleep, eating nutritious foods, high protein foods, getting some movement in your body. These are things that rebuild your mitochondria in your brain. And then if it's serious enough, if the disorders are seek therapy with a specialist in childhood trauma recovery.
Yeah, some great advice. And I assume you're doing okay, having done all of those things?
I'm doing great, thank you. I have happy to report total recovery. And I live in a world now where I consider myself thriving. And, a big part of that is helping other people. Yeah. So I'm on that journey, and that's helped my healing as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, if people want to get a copy of the book, it's called Greater Than Gravity, How Childhood Trauma is Pulling Down Humanity. It's available on our website, TRE.radio, and it's by Michael Menard, who we've been chatting with today. Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.